It's been a decade since Elizabeth Strout won a Pulitzer Prize for her eponymous collection of linked stories about Olive Kitteridge. Now there's something of a sequel to that book, the novel called Olive Again. You don't have to have read Olive Kitteridge to appreciate this new offering, but you'll probably want to. Olive is a complex character, as blunt as she is kind, as hopeless as she is hopeful. Olive Again is out in paperback this month. This is Book Public from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. In Olive Again, Olive is 10 years older and slowly succumbing to the vagaries of aging. She's still sharp and smart. She's also ornery and lonely. Her husband Henry has died, and she's taken up with Jack Kennison, a Harvard professor. She learns that he has also recently lost a spouse and is estranged, like her, from his only child. Olive has endured some terrible stuff, but she's utterly resilient. Nosy and opinionated, sure, but she's also thoughtful and interested in the lives of others she only ostensibly dismisses. What's easy to forget with a character like Olive is that sometimes when we're so hung up on her quirks and her brashness, we miss the finer point of her humanity. We spoke to author Elizabeth Strout about her book, Olive Again. I think there was a gasp of surprise heard around the world when word came out about Olive Again, and everyone had a chance to look forward to more stories about Olive Kitteridge. What do you think this collective excitement's about? And I can assure you it's an excitement that's palpable.
Oh, thank you.
What's your take on how this character has just captured our interest and our adoration?
Yeah. Honestly, I have just been surprised ever since Olive Kitteridge came out and I started to, even go to different countries. I mean, like I remember in Italy, some woman who couldn't speak English, and there was a translator, and she was older, and she said to the translator, tell her that she has seen into my soul. And she had tears in her eyes, and I thought, wow. I mean, I could have died at that moment. I thought, okay, well, I've done everything. I was just so glad to hear that. But the point is, I've thought about that since, and I don't know what it is that woman saw in Olive Kitteridge that so many people seem to see, She's just an example. I maybe shouldn't have used her, but anyway, I thought about it, and I don't know what it is about Olive that is so appealing to so many different people.
And it's not just that, she's blunt and she says what we wish we'd said and she says what we're thinking. Yeah. It really isn't that. There's just something. Right. It's just this ineffable thing.
I think so. Right. There's just this oliveness
yeah.
that, shows up, through me, obviously, but I know, and I've just always been so interested in how many people who seemingly, appear to be quite different have liked her so much.
But to be sure, this is not the same book. So we have Olive Kitteridge from over 10 years ago, and now we have Olive Again, and these are both collections of stories, interconnected stories. We're still in Crosby, Maine. We're still witnessing the lives of these characters in these stories, in these interconnected stories, people from all stripes. And Olive is like the, sort of the connective tissue of it all. And but there's something different in Olive Again. So there's something. It's sort of like, well, here are more short stories set in Maine, and there's Olive, but this is a very different book. So what's different? What's different for you? Do you feel that too?
I do, and I think it has to do with time passing. I mean, I've become older. Olive's become older. I just, life experiences, I think, just, start to add up, and just a sort of a gentle understanding in a way that I might not have had 10 years ago,
Yeah, I keep thinking about how the readers of Olive Kitteridge are now 10 years older, too.
Yeah.
And
right.
Yeah, and so it's perfect timing.
Right.
So,
For much of the population, yeah.
yeah. You start Olive Kitteridge with what is a Henry story, Henry being Olive's first husband,
Right.
with the story Pharmacy. And then in Olive again, we have a Jack story called Arrested.
Right.
I found that so interesting that both collections, as different as they are, start with this. Uh, and of course, Jack
Oh,
is
that's
not her
interesting.
husband until later, but
Yeah.
these two, sort of Olive's significant other
Right.
stories, and they're such different men,
They're so
ostensibly.
different. They're so different. It's so interesting, I thought, I mean, as I was writing it. But that's an interesting comment. I hadn't realized that both I mean, of course, you're absolutely right. And I know when the original Olive Kittredge, I wanted to ease into who Olive was, through her husband, because he's so much kinder than she was. I've got to, I have to have, let the reader come into the world in a gentler way than just having them blasted with Olive again. I mean, with Olive once more.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Jack, I think it wasn't, I didn't think of Jack as like, this nice man necessarily or anything, but I wanted to show his vulnerabilities and set that up. And so that's why I was trying to do that with him being on the stage first.
Mm-hmm. And I kept thinking, so do these two characters, these two men, do they merge somewhere? Do they sort of, do we start to see more of Henry in Jack at a certain point? But there's just something very interesting about Jack in those moments when he's able to apologize
Yeah,
to Olive,
exactly.
or sort of just bend a
Exactly.
little bit, and
Yeah.
which is a little bit of a Henryism in a way.
Right, right, right. But they're such different men. She
Hmm.
had two very, very different husbands, and I think that Jack was a total surprise to her, as she was to him. But in one of those stories, I think Pedicure is something Jack thinks to himself. It's that he could be himself with her, and I think she can be herself with him. And I think that's what they're living on. They can actually be authentically who they are with each other.
Yeah, especially at this stage
Yeah,
of life. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
So I kept thinking about in Olive Kitteridge that Olive had a kind of an emotional affair with a colleague in
Right.
school,
Yeah.
and so there were these glimmers already of the fact that she wasn't. And of course we know this from the beginning, not completely happy in her relationship with Henry, not completely happy with Henry,
Right.
and it's just so interesting to read in Olive again those moments where she misses Henry or misses the idea of
Right.
him and the
Right. Right.
companionship and the compassion
Right.
that he felt for her.
That's right. That's right. And I think, I mean, my sense is that would be true. I mean, when she says to Cindy Coombs, well, if you do die, you'll be sainted. You will become a saint. And then I thought, oh, well, that's actually great because, in a way, Henry has become a saint. I think he was kind of a saint anyway. But,
Hmm.
and then I realized, Ethel Ferguson's talking about her husband as a saint. So that was just an interesting thing to have found myself writing. And then I thought, well, this is probably true for many, many people when they lose somebody.
I absolutely agree with that. But I had this idea in that moment when Olive says that Olive must think that a lot about people who pass on. But I kept thinking, does she think that about herself, that she will be sainted? I had this
Yeah.
sort of a screeching halt moment in that scene with that
Right.
character. And that's not
Right.
what
That's
Olive is
interesting.
about. But
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. I guess my sense would be that I don't think Olive would think that she'd be sainted. I think she's talking about other people. I don't
yeah,
think she considers herself in that way.
yeah, one of the things about Olive that just I don't know if it's resonance or what,
Mhm.
is this idea of she's so bulletproof. She's just
Yeah,
so,
she is. She
she's
is.
just,
Yeah.
except when
Yeah.
she isn't. It's so
I know.
in that
Exactly.
story, in the first collection where she overhears what the daughter-in-law is saying.
Right. Right. Feels the bra.
And yes, the famous scene where she takes the bra.
Right. Exactly.
Is this idea when people are talking about her,
Yeah.
and talking about her not just in mean ways, but in ways that seem rather honest.
Right. Exactly.
She's like a little girl
Yeah.
on a playground feeling
Yeah.
bullied.
Exactly.
It's a
I think
marvelous
you're right.
turn
I
of,
think you're right.
yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's very interesting because I think you're absolutely right. And then there's a part of her that's capable of being a grown-up, and
Uh-huh.
even at times a kind one.
Yeah.
But then 2 minutes later, she can be the kid on the playground again.
Yeah. And she's not someone who's hard, um, and puts on this armor. I don't think, because of those moments where she, uh, as with the daughter-in-law, and then in this collection when she's on the plane and she realizes that the couple next to her is talking about her.
Yeah.
It's just a very, it's very human, and I don't feel like, well, that's why she's so brusque and blunt and mean, is because
Right.
she's been this victim of it. It doesn't seem like it's that easy to
No.
analyze her.
No, I don't. I don't think it is. I think that's probably a very fair statement. That she's kind of hard to analyze.
She's very hard to. Now, you know her backstory. We know a little bit about her backstory. We know that her father committed suicide. We know
Right.
certain things, but do you have as a writer, and this person who created Olive, or Olive showed up one day and there she was, and then showed up again. Do you have a sense of her as a little girl and a teenager, and what color she likes, and all of that? Do you have that?
I have a general, very sort of general knowledge of her, or a sensation of who she would have been as a child and a teenager, but that's not where my interest is. So I understand that, and I use it for myself, but I don't find it interesting. And so what I find interesting is who she is now. So that's. But yes, I do know more about her probably than the reader, but I know more about most of my characters than the reader, just because I only give to the reader what I think they need to know. Because if I give them only what they need to know, then there's enough. I hope that there's enough space left for every reader to bring their own individual story to the work and have some kind of merging,
Mm-hmm.
so that everyone who reads the book will be reading a different book in a way, because they'll be bringing their own life experiences to it. And if there was too much material in it, then that would be a barrier to their being able to enter it, I think. That's how I see it.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about how you reach a certain age and you just feel like, yeah, I'm a product of everything I've experienced in the past. Sure, like I'm who I am because of who I've been in the past, and then I feel like, no, this is who I am right now, and dealing with confronting certain things at this age in my life. It almost doesn't matter what traumatic experience happened at age 7 or whatever.
I know, exactly. Exactly. Well, the whole nature versus nurture thing is endlessly fascinating to me, because, I do think that we're born somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And then, life takes its swings at us, and, we respond. But I do think there's something that we're born with. I don't know.
Yeah. One of the many things I love about these stories is the way that you write the place. I mean, and Crosby, Maine, and where you've described that Olive is this, like this old barnacle, and that she was created to be only in Crosby, Maine, and nowhere else.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you think that Maine is an olive kind of a place?
Well, it's primarily I'm writing about Maine because it's where I'm from and it's the place I know the best. So, I mean, I've lived in New York City for, 36 years, but Maine is still, I'm just so much from Maine. And in that way, I share that with Olive. I mean, she came over, had the ancestors come over many years earlier, as did I. So that's really, these are the people that I know the best in the world. And that's why I write about them. And the place is important because wherever a person is living or where they are from, is important and informs a great deal about who they are, even though we were just talking about, that you're born something as well. But all these things go into, the time and place that a character lives in are very important, obviously.
Yeah, I see that. And the thing that's so striking about this collection, too, is the characters, the ones who seem the least self-aware.
Yeah.
The waitress with the huge, the huge
I
hymen
know.
and as
I
Olive
know.
describes her.
I know.
The ones who seem sort of blissfully ignorant, not that self-aware, just kind of bopping along in the diner or whatever.
Yeah.
They seem the happiest, and everyone else who has so much self-awareness and time to think is miserable or is going through something. But the point becomes, as you move through Crosby, as you move through Maine, as you move through these stories, is that every single character is just as enigmatic and interesting as Olive.
I hope so. Exactly. Because I am just always so interested in ordinary people. I've always, my whole life, I've just always wondered what it was like to be a different person, and I've never gotten over that because when you think about it, we don't know. We really don't know. What is it actually like to be inside that person and to see through their eyes? And we just never know. And it's always been so frustrating for me. And so I've all my life, I've just listened and watched and tried so hard to figure out a person's interior life, and how then it bumps up against the real world. That's what's interesting to me. So I hope the characters reflect that.
Oh, they certainly do. And it's not so much that, so I think they don't communicate in the stories very easily their own sense of their inner life. I mean,
right?
Who does?
Yeah, right.
and so through the stories, we're able to see those things. It's just fascinating how that works. It's like a card trick. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, right. Thinking about the girl who cleans the house for, the Ringrose people.
The Ringroses.
Bertha Babcock. And she's got, so much going on in her life. Whatever. Anyway, yeah.
Well, that character, and I'm glad you brought that up. When she visits the elderly friend, I believe her name is Minnie. Miss Minnie. I was struck by that, and I thought, wow, here's this really young person,
right,
visiting this really old person, and has this little a slight connection to her, and just as a matter of routine goes and visits her, and it's not particularly satisfying for the young person, but she sees the older person, and that's.
Exactly.
That's the thing about seeing the ordinariness in people and being drawn to them for that very reason. I think that would just help our extremely ageist society.
No, I agree. I totally agree. And it is interesting about Kaylee going there to visit Miss Minnie because, Kaylee, she's a young girl with a lovely heart. That's really who she is. She's just got a lovely heart, and she's suffered from her father's death and her mother's sort of little bit neglect, right now. This is at this particular point in her life. Her heart is just, overflowing with need and desire,
the sort of at first unwanted attention that she gets from Mr. Ringrose. These are scenes that might shock some people to read that, but it's really, it just seems like, no, it's just a way to get us to understand
exactly
the character and her, her need for love, and for her to be seen too. She sees everybody else, but she's not seen. Yeah,
exactly, and. It may upset some people, or they may not like, but I can't do anything about that because, as I wrote it, I didn't expect that to happen, but then it happened, and I thought, oh, okay, I get it now. This is what she's going to do, and then he will end up in that place.
And then he ends up in the home as well.
Miss Minnie's place.
In Miss Minnie's nursing home.
I know.
There's so much here about nursing homes and our bodies fallen apart and decrepitude and just the things that happen to us as we age in term even Olive shrinks, Olive who for story after story is described as big and tall and kind of imposing. And then can we talk about how important this book is? We need to have stories where characters see aging people and
I think so.
And not just confront death and mortality. I mean, confront the fact that we will, because of advances in medicine and everything else, we will endure for a little while longer, and we have to be willing to see those things.
Right. I think that that's true, and it's interesting because years ago. I actually forget about this, but many years ago I got a degree in gerontology, and I realized, I always have had a sense for older people, So, obviously, even when I was like 23 and I got that degree, and I've always been drawn to older people, and I think that we need them in literature. I think that they're truthful stories. I think that we need to realize that, these people have dignity. They're living with dignity as much as they possibly can, which is what anybody can do, is live with as much dignity as they can.
Elizabeth Strout is the author of Olive Again. It's out this month from Random House in paperback. This has been Book Public from Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Bree Kirkham is our digital producer. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.